The wheelchair squeaked beneath me as Greg shoved it roughly through the double doors of Brighton Medical Center. His hands gripped the handles so hard, I could feel the tension vibrating through the frame. "Remember what we practiced," he hissed, his breath hot against my ear. Complete loss of sensation below the waist. Occasional spasms. Pain level 8 when they press here. His finger jabbed sharply between my shoulder blades. I winced, not acting this time. "Either you stay in that wheelchair and keep your mouth shut, or I'll make sure you need one for real." The whisper came with a painful squeeze to my shoulder. A warning. A promise. The insurance company's medical assessment room was blindingly bright. A middle-aged doctor with tired eyes glanced up from her clipboard. Dr. Patel, according to her name tag. She'd be the 4th doctor to evaluate me in 6 months. "Miss Harper? I'm Dr. Patel. I'll be conducting your evaluation today." Greg transformed instantly, his face arranging itself into concerned employer mode. "Take your time with her, doctor. Poor Maddie hasn't been the same since that terrible accident at our warehouse." Dr. Patel's eyes flickered between us. For a terrifying second, I thought she saw through everything. The staged accident, the fake medical reports, the wheelchair I didn't actually need. "Mr. Osmond, Greg Osmond, I'm her employer." He extended his hand with practiced charm. "Just want to make sure she gets the care she deserves. I'll need to examine Miss Harper alone, Mr. Osmond." Greg's smile tightened. "Of course. I'll be right outside, if she needs anything." As the door closed behind him, Dr. Patel's expression changed subtly. She pulled her chair close to my wheelchair. "How long have you been experiencing paralysis, Miss Harper?" 6 months, 2 weeks, 3 days, I answered, just as I'd been coached. "And the pain? Constant. Sometimes I wake up thinking I can feel my legs, but then there's just pain." The script came easily now. 6 months of repeating the same lies had worn grooves in my mind. She nodded, making notes. "I'd like to test your reflexes." My heart hammered as she approached with her little rubber hammer. Greg had drilled me repeatedly on how to prevent any reaction. "Don't flinch. Don't respond. Dead nerves don't jump." The hammer tapped just below my knee. I kept my leg limp, focusing on the ceiling tiles. 1, 2, 3, 4. "I'm going to help you onto the examination table now." I let myself be dead weight as she and a nurse transferred me. The guilt churned in my stomach as these professionals wasted their time and skill on a fraud. "This might be uncomfortable," Dr. Patel warned before pressing firmly along my spine. It was more than uncomfortable. It was excruciating to keep my lower body unresponsive when every instinct screamed to move away from the pain. A single tear escaped, rolling down my cheek. Dr. Patel paused. "Miss Harper, are you all right?" "Just the usual pain," I whispered. Her eyes held mine for a long moment. Then, very quietly, "Interesting that your muscle tone hasn't atrophied after 6 months of paralysis." My blood turned to ice water. "I've reviewed your previous assessments. There are inconsistencies." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. If Greg found out she suspected, "Miss Harper, if there's something you want to tell me." The door swung open. Greg stood there, all concern and authority. "Everything okay? Maddie, you look upset." Dr. Patel straightened, professional mask back in place. "We're nearly finished, Mr. Osmond." Greg wheeled me out 30 minutes later, his grip painful on the handles. "What did she say to you?" he demanded, once we reached the parking lot. "Nothing, just routine questions." "You're lying." He spun the chair to face him, crouching to my level. "If you mess this up, Maddie, there won't be a corner of this city where you can hide. Not from me, not from what I'll do to you." Looking into his eyes, I believed him completely. Hey there, if you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Drop a comment with what you think might happen next. I'd love to hear your theories. Now, let's get back to Maddie's story. My name is Madison Harper, but everyone calls me Maddie. Before all this started, I was just a bookkeeper at Lakeside Storage and Shipping, trying to keep my head above water. Student loans, medical bills from my mom's final illness, rent that kept climbing, numbers were my life, and the numbers weren't adding up. I wasn't remarkable. Average height, average brown hair I usually pulled back in a ponytail, and a talent for being overlooked in a room. The only thing that stood out about me was my memory for numbers. I could glance at a spreadsheet and remember it perfectly. That skill had landed me the bookkeeping job at Lakeside, where I'd worked for 3 years. Greg had noticed me, though. Not in a romantic way, worse. He'd noticed I was desperate. "Just a small accounting adjustment," he'd said the first time. sliding a paper across my desk. Move this expense from column A to column B. Nobody gets hurt. Small adjustments became bigger ones. Inventory that disappeared from the books. Shipments that never existed. I told myself I was just following orders, that the responsibility wasn't mine. Then came the day Greg called me into his office. Maddie, how would you like to clear all your debts? One simple job. The job was an insurance scam. Pretend to be injured in a workplace accident. Claim workers' compensation. Get a settlement. Split the money. 10% of whatever we get, Greg promised. Could be hundreds of thousands. All you have to do is sit in a wheelchair and look sad. I said no. I had lines I wouldn't cross. 3 days later, my apartment was broken into. Nothing taken. Just my mother's photo album opened to her funeral program. A warning. The next day, Greg mentioned casually how terrible it would be if the accounting adjustments I'd made were reported to the authorities. 5 to 10 years for fraud, I hear. Shame about your mother's medical bills, all that sacrifice for nothing. I showed up at the warehouse on a Tuesday morning. The accident happened at 10:17 a.m., according to the report. A shelving unit that never actually fell. A heavy box that never struck my back. Witnesses, co-workers who needed their jobs as badly as I needed mine, who saw the whole thing. The ambulance, the hospital, the diagnosis, trauma, induced partial paralysis, prognosis uncertain, and just like that, Madison Harper disappeared into a wheelchair. The first week was almost easy. I stayed in bed at home, supposedly recovering from the initial trauma. Greg hired a part-time aide, his cousin Vince, to help me. Help meant watch. You ever try to stand up when someone might see? Vince told me his first day, and I'll break your legs for real. By week 3, the act had become exhausting. I had to remember to drag my body around my apartment when alone. Had to remember not to flinch when something fell near my feet. Had to endure the pitying looks from neighbors who brought casseroles and empty sympathy. The physical therapist, a kind woman named Jenny, was the hardest to face. She was so dedicated, so encouraged by the smallest improvements I pretended to make. You're doing great, Maddie, she'd say, not knowing she was wasting her time on a liar. Greg filed claim after claim. Workers' compensation was just the beginning. There was the liability insurance for the faulty shelving unit, the personal injury suit against the shelving manufacturer, the medical malpractice angle he was working on, claiming the hospital had missed a treatable injury window. The initial few weeks stretched into months. Greg's demands grew with his ambition. What started as a simple injury claim morphed into a multi-million-dollar fraud operation. The settlement projections are looking great, he told me 4 months in, sitting in my living room while I pretended my legs were useless lumps beneath a blanket. They're talking about permanent disability payout structures. We could be looking at over $2 million. I felt sick. When does this end, Greg? You said a few weeks. His smile vanished. It ends when I say it ends. You getting cold feet, Maddie? Remember, your signature is on those falsified medical forms. Your voice is on those recorded statements. You walk away now. You're walking straight into a prison cell. That night, alone in my bedroom, I let myself stand up. Just for 5 minutes. Just to remember what it felt like to be whole. The muscles in my legs had weakened from underuse. The only real medical consequence of this whole charade. I didn't know then that someone was watching through my bedroom window. Didn't see the camera phone recording my moment of truth. The next morning, Greg showed me the video. Insurance fraud is a felony, he said pleasantly, holding his phone so I could see myself standing, stretching. 5 years minimum. Unless there's a death involved in the fraud scheme, then it's 20 to life. I stared at him. Death? What are you talking about? His smile grew cold. Accidents happen, Maddie. People fall downstairs, choke on food, take too many pain pills. I'd hate for anything to happen to you before we get our money. The threat hung between us, undisguised now. So here's the new deal, Greg continued. You keep playing your part. When the final settlement comes through, you get 2%. You said 10%. I'm saying 2% now. About $40,000. Enough to start over somewhere far away, which is what you'll need to do. Or you can go to prison, or have an accident. Your choice. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just trapped in a wheelchair. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, with no way out that didn't end in disaster. Or so I thought, until Krista Bell walked into my life. She arrived unannounced at my apartment 3 days after Greg's ultimatum. 5'0", with sharp eyes and a sharper smile. Miss Harper, I'm Krista Bell, insurance investigator. My heart nearly stopped. I wasn't expecting anyone today. That's rather the point of unannounced visits. She glanced at the wheelchair I'd scrambled into when the doorbell rang. May I come in? As she entered, I knocked over a glass of water in my nervousness. The water spread across the floor while I sat helplessly in my chair. Aren't you going to clean that up? She asked mildly. I can't reach it easily. Her eyes never left mine. Impressive how quickly you moved just then. Getting into your chair, I mean. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Upper body strength, I managed. Physical therapy. She handed me her business card. I'll be in touch, Miss Harper. We have some discrepancies to discuss. After she left, I sat shaking in my wheelchair. The card seemed to burn in my hand. A silent accusation. I didn't know it then, but Christabel was about to change everything. Greg showed up at my apartment less than an hour after Christabel left. He must have had someone watching my place. Who was that woman? He demanded, barging in without knocking. Vince followed, closing the door with deliberate slowness. Insurance investigator, I whispered, my throat dry. Christabel. Greg's face flushed red. And what did you tell her? Nothing. She barely asked anything, just looked around and left. He snatched the business card from my hand, reading it with narrowed eyes. Bell Investigative Services, independent contractor. He tore the card in half. Did she say who hired her? No. Greg paced the small living room while Vince stood by the door, arms crossed. I could practically see Greg's mind working, calculating risks, planning countermoves. Change of plans, he announced. You're moving in with me. What? No. Not a request, Maddie. His voice dropped dangerously low. If they're watching you, we need to control what they see, all the time. People will talk, I protested weakly. Your neighbors will see a kind-hearted employer taking in his injured employee because she can't manage alone. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Very touching story, don't you think? That evening, Vince packed a suitcase with my clothes while Greg made calls. I sat uselessly in my wheelchair, watching my last shreds of independence disappear. What about my rent? My lease? I asked as Vince carried my things to Greg's SUV. All taken care of, Greg replied smoothly. I'll sublet your place to Vince. Keeps everything in the family. The realization hit me with sickening clarity. They'd planned this all along. The accident, the fraud, my eventual disappearance. I was never meant to walk away from this. Greg's house was a sprawling ranch-style home in an upscale neighborhood. As we pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed security cameras mounted discreetly at the corners of the house. Your room is in the back, Greg informed me, watching Vince unload my suitcase. It's got all the accessibility features you'll need for your condition. The bedroom was large but felt like a cell. Hospital-style bed, grab bars in the attached bathroom, a camera in the corner of the ceiling. For your safety, Greg explained, following my gaze to the camera. In case you fall. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, I heard Greg and Vince talking in the hallway. Need to speed things up, Greg was saying. This investigator complicates things. What about after? Vince's voice was lower, harder to hear. We stick to the plan. Once the money clears, we handle the loose end. A chill ran through me. I was the loose end. The next morning, Greg wheeled me into his home office. A man in an expensive suit waited there, examining some papers. Maddie, this is Mr. Reynolds. He's our attorney for the settlement negotiations. Reynolds barely looked at me, just nodded and continued reviewing documents. The insurance company has agreed to mediation next week. Their initial offer is $1.7 million. Greg frowned. Not enough. We're asking for lifetime care. I've countered at $2.5 million. With Miss Harper's medical evaluations and testimony about pain and suffering, we have a strong position. I sat silently as they discussed me as if I weren't there. Lifetime care, pain and suffering, all lies built on my supposed paralysis. There's one potential issue, Reynolds said, finally looking at me. An independent investigator has been asking questions. Someone named Bell. Greg's hand tightened on my wheelchair handle. Nothing to worry about. Maddie's condition is well documented. Even so, we should expedite. I've arranged for a final medical evaluation tomorrow with Dr. Levitz. He's sympathetic to complicated cases like yours. I recognize the implication. Dr. Levitz was corrupt, another player in Greg's network. That afternoon, while Greg was on a conference call, I wheeled myself around the house, memorizing the layout. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, home office, open kitchen, and living area. Sliding glass doors to a covered patio. The security system keypad by the front door required a code I didn't know. I was examining the back door when a voice startled me. Looking for something? I spun the wheelchair around. Vince stood watching me, arms crossed. Just getting familiar with the house, I said, forcing a smile. It helps to know where everything is when you can't walk. Right. His tone made it clear he didn't believe me. Greg wants you to practice your testimony for tomorrow's medical evaluation. In the office. Now. For hours, Greg drilled me on my responses. The constant pain, the nightmares about the accident, the depression from losing my mobility, the humiliation of needing help for basic tasks. And remember, he instructed, Dr. Levitz will press hard on your legs. He'll claim it's to test for sensation, but really he's checking if you flinch. Don't react, no matter what. That night, I lay awake planning my escape. The windows had security sensors. The doors were alarmed. Vince slept in the room across the hall. Even if I could get out, where would I go? Who would believe me over Greg's network of paid witnesses and doctors? My phone had disappeared during the move. For your own good, Greg had said, those investigator types can track cell signals. The real reason was obvious. Isolation made me easier to control. Morning came too quickly. Greg helped me dress in loose-fitting clothes that would allow easy examination. The shirt was navy blue. Makes you look paler, more fragile, he explained. Dr. Levitz's office was in a medical complex across town. Unlike the other doctors, he conducted the examination with Greg present. His questions were leading, designed to elicit specific answers. And the pain is constant, yes? Radiating from the spine down the legs? Yes, I answered dully. Interferes with sleep, with concentration? Yes. His physical examination was cursory at best. He pressed along my spine, watched for reactions I'd been trained not to show, then nodded to Greg. Clear case of permanent nerve damage, he announced. I'll have my report ready this afternoon. As we left his office, I noticed a woman in the waiting room, pretending to read a magazine. Krista Bell. Our eyes met briefly, before Greg wheeled me past. She's following us, I whispered. Greg's pace didn't change. I know. Let her watch. We've got nothing to hide, right, Maddie? His hand squeezed my shoulder painfully. That evening, Reynolds called with news. The insurance company had accepted the settlement offer of $2.3 million. The final hearing was scheduled for the following week. Once the judge approves the settlement, the money will be transferred to the special needs trust we've established, Reynolds explained over speakerphone. Miss Harper will need to give a brief statement at the hearing, but it's mostly a formality. After the call ended, Greg poured himself a glass of whiskey, his mood jubilant. $2.3 million, he savored the words. And all you had to do was sit on your ass for 6 months. And my share? I dared to ask. His smile turned cold. 2%, 46,000, enough to disappear somewhere very far away. He took a long sip. After expenses, of course. Expenses? Vince's services, Reynolds' legal fees, the accommodations I've so generously provided. His gesture encompassed the house. Let's call it an even 30,000. The injustice burned in my chest. 6 months of lies, of threats, of pretending I couldn't walk. For $30,000, and a life forever, looking over my shoulder. That wasn't our deal, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. Greg's amusement vanished. He set down his glass and leaned close to my face. There is no our deal, Maddie. There's what I decide to give you, and there's what happens to people who don't know their place. His breath smelled of whiskey and menace. Who else would hire damaged goods like you? Who would believe anything you say after you've been lying for months? You're nothing without me. Remember that. He straightened up, mask of civility back in place. Now, let's practice your courtroom statement again. I want those tears on cue when you talk about how the injury destroyed your life. The night before the settlement hearing, I couldn't sleep. Greg's warning echoed in my head. Once the money came through, I was a loose end to be handled. I had no illusions about what that meant. From my window, I could see Vince smoking on the patio, his bulky silhouette illuminated by the security lights. The house was a prison, and tomorrow would determine whether I ever walked out alive. A soft tap at my bedroom window made me freeze. I turned slowly to see a face peering in. Krista Bell. She held up a note against the glass. Bathroom, vent, now. My heart pounding, I eased myself into the wheelchair and rolled to the attached bathroom, closing the door quietly. The ceiling vent was directly above the toilet. Can you hear me? Krista's whisper came through the vent. Yes, I answered softly. How did you? No time. Listen carefully. I know you're faking. I know Osmond is threatening you. I can help, but you have to trust me. Why should I? Because I'm not working for the insurance company. I'm with the FBI. We've been building a case against Osmond for months. Insurance fraud is just the tip of the iceberg. My mind reeled. If you know all this, why haven't you arrested him? We need direct evidence of the fraud. His network is extensive, corrupt doctors, lawyers, witnesses. We need someone on the inside to break it open. Me. Yes. Tomorrow at the hearing, when the judge asks for your statement, tell the truth. All of it. We'll have agents in the courtroom. He'll kill me, I whispered, genuine fear in my voice. Not with federal agents present. This is your only chance, Maddie. After the money transfers, you become a liability to him. The bathroom door suddenly rattled. Maddie? Who are you talking to? Greg's voice, suspicious and threatening. I flushed the toilet quickly. Just on the phone, I called back. Found it in my old jacket pocket. The door burst open. Greg stood there, rage distorting his features. In his hand was my wheelchair strap. Who were you talking to? Each word punctuated with a step toward me. Behind him, in the bedroom doorway, stood Vince. His expression told me everything I needed to know. They'd heard enough. Greg lunged forward, yanking me from the toilet by my arm. My body, weak from months of underuse, offered little resistance as he dragged me back to the bedroom. Check outside, he barked at Vince, who disappeared immediately. Greg shoved me onto the bed, looming over me. Who were you talking to? His voice was deadly quiet now. And don't lie to me, Maddie. Not now. My mind raced. If Krista was still outside, Vince would find her. If the FBI was really involved, where were they? It was just... A crash from outside interrupted me. Greg's head snapped toward the window, shouting. A thud. Then silence. Greg's face twisted with rage. He grabbed my throat, pushing me back against the headboard. What did you do? I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision as his fingers tightened. Then Vince appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. Found her. Some woman. She ran. I couldn't. Greg released my throat, and I gasped for air. Get the car, he ordered Vince. Back entrance. We're moving her now. The hearing's tomorrow, Vince protested. We're so close. And now we have the FBI crawling around. We stick to the contingency plan. Contingency plan. The words sent ice through my veins. Greg turned back to me, his expression terrifyingly calm. Get dressed. Warm clothes. Now. I can't go to the hearing from somewhere else. I croaked, rubbing my throat. The judge will... There won't be a hearing. Greg pulled a duffel bag from under my bed. It had been there all along. Plan B. We file a report that you had a medical emergency. Complications from your injury. Very sad. Very final. Horror dawned as I understood. They were going to kill me and claim I died from complications of my fake injury. The insurance policy pays out with or without the hearing if you're deceased, Greg explained, unzipping the bag to reveal ropes and duct tape. Slightly smaller settlement, but much cleaner. No loose ends. My eyes darted to the door, to the window. No escape. Get up, Greg demanded. I can't. The paralysis. Drop the act, he snarled. I heard you talking to whoever was at that vent. The game is over. When I didn't move, he grabbed my arms and yanked me to my feet. My legs, weak from months of disuse, buckled beneath me. I wasn't entirely faking as I collapsed to the floor. Greg cursed, grabbing the wheelchair. Fine. One last ride. As he roughly lifted me into the chair, I spotted something on the nightstand. My water glass. Heavy crystal. A gift from Jenny, the physical therapist who'd believed in my recovery. Greg turned to grab the duffel bag. I lunged for the glass, my fingers closing around it just as he turned back. I swung with every ounce of strength I had. The crystal connected with his temple with a sickening crack. Greg staggered, blood instantly streaming down his face. He blinked at me in shock before crumpling to the floor. For a moment, I sat frozen, the bloody glass still clutched in my hand. Greg lay motionless, blood pooling beneath his head. Was he dead? Had I killed him? A noise in the hallway jolted me back to reality. Vince would return any second. With shaking hands, I lowered myself from the wheelchair to the floor. Grabbing Greg's cell phone from his pocket, I dragged myself toward the bed, sliding underneath just as Vince's heavy footsteps approached. Car's ready, he announced, entering the room. Then, Greg? What the... I held my breath as Vince rushed to Greg's side. Greg! Greg! Wake up! A groan. Greg wasn't dead. What happened? Vince demanded, helping Greg sit up. She hit me, Greg slurred, hand pressed to his bleeding head. Find her. My heart hammered as Vince searched the room, checking the bathroom, the closet. When he dropped to his knees to look under the bed, I closed my eyes, certain I was about to die. She's gone, Vince said, standing up. Must have run out while I was getting the car. Impossible, Greg mumbled. Her legs, too weak. Check outside. As Vince rushed out, I heard Greg stagger to his feet. The bedroom door closed. A key turned in the lock. Footsteps moved away down the hall. I waited until silence fell before crawling out from under the bed. Blood smeared the floor where Greg had fallen. The wheelchair sat empty by the wall, a silent reminder of my 6-month charade. With trembling fingers, I unlocked Greg's phone. No password. His arrogance had finally worked in my favor. I dialed 911. Emergency services, what's your… My name is Madison Harper, I whispered, pressing myself against the wall beside the door. I'm being held captive at 478 Lakeview Drive. They're planning to kill me. Please, help. Stay on the line, Miss Harper. Officers are on their way. Are you somewhere safe? No, they've locked me in a bedroom. They'll be back any minute. Can you barricade the door? I looked around desperately. The dresser was too heavy to move with my weakened muscles. The chair was bolted to the wheelchair. No, Footsteps in the hallway. The key in the lock. They're coming, I breathed, shoving the phone under the bed. The door swung open. Greg stood there, a kitchen towel pressed to his head, blood seeping through the fabric. His eyes were unfocused, but the gun in his hand was steady. Get up, he ordered. I didn't move. I said get up. He aimed the gun at my head. I know you can walk. Get up. Slowly, painfully, I pulled myself to my feet, using the bedpost for support. My legs trembled violently, barely able to hold my weight after months of forced inactivity. Move, he gestured with the gun toward the door. Each step was agony as my atrophied muscles protested. I stumbled into the hallway, Greg close behind me. Vince waited at the back door, eyes widening when he saw me standing. She really was faking. Car, now, Greg pressed the gun to my back. As they marched me toward the garage, distant sirens wailed. Greg froze, then grabbed my arm roughly. Neighbors called the cops, Vince said, peering through the blinds. Probably heard the commotion. Basement, Greg decided, shoving me toward another door. Until they're gone. The basement stairs loomed before me, dark and steep. Greg pushed me forward. My weak legs buckled on the first step, and I tumbled headlong down the staircase, pain exploding through my body as I crashed onto the concrete floor below. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs. Above me, Greg cursed. Footsteps thumped down the stairs. Is she alive? Vince's voice seemed distant through the ringing in my ears. Unfortunately, Greg's face appeared in my blurred vision. Cops are at the door. Stash her in the utility room. I'll handle them. Rough hands dragged me across the floor. A door opened. I was shoved into darkness. The door slamming behind me. The utility room was small and windowless. Water heater, furnace, tools hanging on pegboards. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering under the door, I forced myself to focus through the pain. I could hear muffled voices upstairs. Greg talking to the police. Lying, no doubt. Claiming a misunderstanding. A prank call. Nothing to see here, officers. Would they believe him? Would they search the house? Or would they leave, satisfied by Greg's explanations, leaving me to whatever fate he had planned? My hand brushed something metal on the floor. A screwdriver, fallen from the pegboard. I clutched it like a lifeline. Minutes passed. The voices upstairs continued. Then footsteps on the basement stairs. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, screwdriver raised. If I was going to die, I wouldn't go easily. The utility room door swung open. A flashlight beam swept the small space. Madison Harper? A woman's voice. Not Greg, not Vince. Here, I croaked. The beam found me, huddled against the wall. Christabel's face appeared in the doorway, alongside a uniformed police officer. She's here, Krista called over her shoulder. Get the paramedics. More footsteps pounded down the stairs. More voices. A blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Gentle hands helping me up. Greg, I managed to say. Vince. Where? In custody, Krista assured me, supporting my weight as we moved toward the stairs. It's over, Maddie. You're safe now. But I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Not until I'd told the truth. All of it. In that courtroom. The next 12 hours passed in a blur. Hospital. Police statements. FBI interviews. X-rays confirming what I already knew. No paralysis. just severely weakened muscles from months of disuse. Krista stayed with me, explaining that the FBI had been investigating Greg for years. Insurance fraud, money laundering, suspected connections to organized crime. My case was just the latest, in a pattern. We needed someone on the inside, she said as a doctor examined my bruises. When I saw you at your apartment that day, the way you moved, I knew you weren't paralyzed, but I also knew you were trapped. Why didn't you just arrest him then? Not enough evidence. We needed to catch him in the act, preferably with the money changing hands. That's why tomorrow's hearing is still so important. I stared at her. The hearing? It's still happening? 9 a.m. sharp. Judge Harmon's courtroom. Greg and Vince are in custody, but Reynolds, the lawyer, doesn't know that yet. He's expecting to proceed as planned. What do you need me to do? Krista leaned forward. Exactly what we discussed. When the judge asks for your statement, you tell the truth. Every detail. We'll handle the rest. Morning came too quickly. My body ached from the fall down the stairs. My throat bore fingerprint bruises from Greg's attack. But for the first time in 6 months, I didn't have to pretend. The FBI provided a wheelchair, a bitter irony, to help me navigate the courthouse. My muscles were still too weak for prolonged walking. Krista pushed me through security, past curious stares and whispers. Reynolds waited outside the courtroom, pacing nervously. His eyes widened when he saw me. Miss Harper, where's Greg? What happened to your neck? Minor setback, I replied coolly. Shall we go in? Wouldn't want to keep the judge waiting. Confusion flickered across his face, but his lawyer's training took over. Of course, I've prepared everything. Just stick to your statement as rehearsed. If he only knew. Judge Harmon's courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Insurance company lawyers clustered at one table. Reynolds guided me to another. Court officers stood by the doors. And scattered throughout the gallery, faces I recognized from Krista's team, FBI agents, waiting for their moment. All rise for the Honorable Judge Harmon. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, took her seat at the bench. Her eyes swept the courtroom, lingering briefly on my bruised neck. Be seated. Harper versus Midland Insurance. Settlement hearing. Are all parties present? Reynolds stood. Philip Reynolds for the plaintiff, Madison Harper. Our co-counsel appears to have been delayed, Your Honor. The insurance company lawyer rose. Thomas Briggs for Midland Insurance, Your Honor. Judge Harmon nodded. I've reviewed the settlement agreement. $2.3 million for permanent disability, resulting from workplace injury. Before approving, I'd like to hear from Miss Harper directly. Her gaze shifted to me. Miss Harper, do you understand the terms of this settlement? Reynolds touched my shoulder, a silent reminder to stick to the script. I looked up at Judge Harmon. This was it, the moment that would either save me or condemn me. Your Honor, I began, my voice stronger than I expected. Before I answer that question, there's something I need to tell you about this case. Reynolds' hand clamped down on my shoulder, fingers digging painfully into my collarbone. Your Honor, my client is understandably emotional today. Perhaps we could take a brief recess. No, I said firmly, shrugging off his hand. No more delays, no more lies. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harmon leaned forward. Go on, Miss Harper. I took a deep breath. This entire case is a fraud, Your Honor. I was never paralyzed. The accident at Lakeside Storage never happened. It was all staged by my boss, Greg Osmond, as part of an insurance scam. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reynolds' face drained of color. The insurance company lawyers exchanged stunned glances. Miss Harper, Judge Harmon said carefully, these are serious allegations. Are you aware that by making this statement, you're admitting to participating in insurance fraud? Yes, Your Honor. My voice trembled but held firm. I was coerced. Greg threatened me, blackmailed me, and eventually held me captive when I tried to back out. I gestured to my bruised neck. These marks are from last night when he tried to strangle me after discovering I was planning to tell the truth today. Judge Harmon's eyes narrowed. Mr. Reynolds, did you have knowledge of this alleged fraud? Reynolds had partially recovered his composure. Your Honor, my client appears confused. Perhaps her medications— I'm not confused, I interrupted, and I can prove it. With shaking hands, I pushed myself up from the wheelchair. My legs quivered beneath me, weak but functional. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as I took one unsteady step forward, then another. Walking to the witness stand felt like crossing an ocean. Each step sent pain shooting through my atrophied muscles, but I refused to falter. When I reached the stand, I turned to face the courtroom. For 6 months, I've pretended to be paralyzed from the waist down. The accident was staged. The medical reports were falsified. Greg paid doctors to lie, witnesses to give false statements, and threatened me to keep quiet. Judge Harmon's expression was unreadable. Why come forward now, Miss Harper? Because Greg planned to kill me after getting the settlement money. Last night, he and his cousin Vince attacked me when they discovered I was going to testify. They're in police custody now. As if on cue, the courtroom doors opened. 2 FBI agents entered, escorting a handcuffed Reynolds out. The insurance lawyers watched in shock as another agent approached the bench with a file. Judge Harmon examined the documents, her expression hardening. She looked up at me. Miss Harper, the FBI has corroborated parts of your story. Greg Osmond and Vincent Teller were arrested last night for kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy to commit murder. They're also facing federal charges for insurance fraud. She set down the file. I'm ordering this case dismissed and referring it to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. You may step down. My legs nearly gave out as relief washed over me. A court officer rushed forward to help me back to my seat. Judge Harmon banged her gavel. Court is adjourned pending criminal investigation. As people began filing out, the lead insurance lawyer approached me cautiously. Miss Harper, I don't know whether to thank you or have you arrested. She has immunity, Krista said, appearing beside me. Full cooperation agreement with the FBI. The lawyer nodded slowly. I hope it was worth it. Was it worth it? 6 months of lies? Of fear? Of watching my body waste away in a wheelchair I didn't need? As they wheeled me from the courtroom into the bright morning sunshine, I wasn't sure. But I was free, and that was a start. The months that followed were harder than I'd imagined. Physical therapy 3 times a week to rebuild my atrophied muscles. Weekly sessions with a trauma counselor. Endless meetings with FBI agents and prosecutors as they built their case against Greg, Vince, and their network. Despite my immunity deal, I wasn't absolved of consequences. I had to pay back every penny I'd received during the fraud. Disability payments, medical reimbursements, living expenses. My savings were wiped out, my credit destroyed, my reputation in tatters after news of the wheelchair fraud hit local headlines. Finding work proved nearly impossible. Who would hire a confessed fraudster, immunity deal, or not? I moved into a tiny studio apartment in a different part of town, paying rent by doing data entry work online. 3 months after the hearing, I sat in another courtroom, this time as a witness in Greg's criminal trial. He glared at me from the defendant's table as I recounted every detail of the scheme, every threat, every moment of fear. And why did you agree to participate? The prosecutor asked. At first, because of blackmail. Greg had framed me for accounting irregularities at Lakeside. Later, because I was afraid he would kill me if I backed out. No further questions. Greg's defense attorney approached, smiling coldly. Miss Harper, isn't it true that you stood to gain financially from this fraud? Yes, but, and you actively participated for 6 months before coming forward? Because I was threatened. Just answer yes or no, Miss Harper. You participated willingly for months, correct? Objection, the prosecutor interjected. Argumentative. Sustained. The defense attorney continued hammering at my credibility, my motives, my character. By the time I left the witness stand, I felt as broken as I had in that wheelchair. But my testimony, combined with evidence from the FBI investigation, proved damning. Greg was convicted on all counts: fraud, extortion, kidnapping, attempted murder, 25 years without parole. Vince received 15 years for his role. Reynolds, 5 years for conspiracy and disbarment. Justice, they called it. But justice didn't heal my legs, didn't restore my reputation, didn't erase the nightmares that jolted me awake most nights. 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. Krista Bell, carrying a folder and a small potted plant. Housewarming gift, she explained, setting the plant on my windowsill. How are you doing? I gestured around the sparse studio, living the dream. She smiled sadly. I have something that might help. She opened the folder, revealing a job application. The FBI Victim Services Division has an opening. Administrative work, nothing glamorous, but steady pay and benefits. Why would they hire me? I participated in a fraud, under duress, and you came forward at great personal risk. That counts for something. She pushed the application toward me. Your experience gives you insight most people don't have. Think about it. After she left, I stared at the application for hours. Did I deserve a second chance? Could I rebuild after everything that happened? 1 year to the day after I stood up in Judge Harmon's courtroom, I stood in front of a room full of FBI cadets, leaning slightly on a cane. My name is Madison Harper. I began. 1 year ago, I was the key witness in one of the largest insurance fraud cases in state history. Before that, I was a victim and a participant. Today, I'm here to teach you about coercion, about recognizing when someone is acting under duress, and about how to help victims find the courage to come forward. As I spoke, I saw understanding dawn in their eyes. These future agents wouldn't just see cases and criminals, they'd see people caught in impossible situations. That evening, I visited Jenny, my former physical therapist, who'd been devastated to learn her efforts had been part of a fraud. I wanted to thank you, I told her as we sat in her living room. Even though I was lying about the paralysis, your belief in me helped me find the strength to stand up, literally and figuratively. Are you still using the techniques I taught you? She asked. Every day. They saved my life when I had to climb those basement stairs to escape. She smiled, eyes glistening. Then my work wasn't wasted after all. Walking home that night, my steps were steady, my cane more a comfort than a necessity now. A text message lit up my phone, a reminder about tomorrow's speaking engagement at a fraud victims support group. The path forward wasn't straight, wasn't easy, but at least I was walking it on my own 2 feet, one step at a time. Some days that was enough. If this story impacted you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps me continue sharing stories of survival and resilience. Have you ever faced a situation where standing up for the truth seemed impossible? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The hospital television glowed in the darkened room as Everett adjusted his tie on screen. With sincere regret, we announced that Marin will be stepping down from her position to focus on her health recovery. His voice carried a practiced, somber tone that never reached his eyes. Next to him, Odette nodded with performative sadness, her hand unconsciously touching the silver bracelet on her wrist, my grandmother's antique silver bangle that I'd kept in my locked drawer for 13 years, worn only during our most significant auctions. My heart rate monitor beeped faster. That bracelet had been in my drawer the morning I collapsed. 3 days ago, while previewing the Havenworth collection, the most significant private art assemblage to hit the market in decades. I'd spent 11 years building our rare acquisitions division, traveling across 3 continents to personally authenticate every piece in this collection. We're fortunate that Odette has worked alongside Marin for years. Everett continued, placing his hand on her shoulder. She understands the authentication protocols and will ensure a seamless transition as our new head of acquisitions. I gripped the remote with trembling fingers, my knuckles white. Lies. Authentication isn't something you absorb through proximity. It's thousands of hours studying brushstrokes, pigment aging, canvas textures, the subtle reactions of materials to ultraviolet light, things I'd never fully shared with Odette or anyone. The news segment cut to clips of Odette walking confidently through our preview gallery. That was filmed today, wearing my role like she'd been born to it. The upcoming Havenworth auction will proceed as scheduled, she announced to the camera, gesturing toward the Renaissance portraits I'd spent months authenticating. Marin laid excellent groundwork, and we're moving forward with her vision. My vision. 5 pieces in that collection had raised red flags during my final examinations. Subtle inconsistencies in the Van Eyck that no one else would catch. A questionable signature on the Botticelli study. The slightly wrong chemical composition in the green pigment of the Dürer landscape. Issues I'd planned to resolve before publishing the final catalog. Information I kept in my head, not written anywhere. A text message illuminated my phone. Congratulations on your retirement. The board approved the transition this morning. Take care of yourself. Everett. I hadn't submitted any retirement. There had been no discussion, no transition plan. The nurse entered, checking my IV drip. Your heart rate's elevated. Everything okay? Just work stress. Exactly what put you here, she replied, adjusting something on my monitor. Severe exhaustion, dangerously high cortisol levels, and that minor cardiac event. Your body can't take this kind of stress anymore. After she left, I pressed my emergency call button. 20 minutes later, my doctor stood at my bedside. I need to leave, I said. Absolutely not. You've had a cardiac event, your blood work is concerning, and what happens if I check myself out? She sighed. I strongly advise against it, but legally, you can sign an AMA form. Against medical advice. Get me the form. Marin, you need to rest. Whatever's happening at work, they're auctioning forgeries, I whispered. They don't know it yet, but they will. And when those pieces sell to our top collectors, I didn't finish the sentence. The doctor studied my face. Is this worth dying over? It's worth living for. I spent that night making plans. The Havenworth auction was scheduled for 2 weeks from now. The catalog was already photographed and being printed, but I knew which pieces needed additional verification. Pieces that, if sold as authentic, would destroy our reputation and devastate collectors who trusted us. In the morning, I disconnected my heart monitor carefully, avoiding the alarm. I called my older sister B, the only person I fully trusted. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "And your guest cottage. What's happened?" The concern in her voice was immediate. "A coup while I was unconscious." B arrived within the hour with clothes in her car. I signed the AMA forms while the doctor watched disapprovingly, and we left through the service entrance to avoid anyone who might recognize me. B's lakeside cottage was 30 miles from the city, secluded and peaceful. As she helped me settle in, I explained everything. "You need to call a lawyer," she said, her face tight with anger. "Not yet. First, I need to make some calls." Over the next 3 days, I reached out to contacts across the art world, not to expose what was happening, but to ensure they would watch the auction with scrutiny. "The Havenworth collection has some interesting pieces," I said carefully. "Pay special attention to the Northern Renaissance works and the Italian studies." On the 4th day, my former employer announced my official resignation due to health reasons. They released a statement thanking me for my 11 years of service and expressing full confidence in Odette's leadership. Before I continue any further with this story that's going to reveal corporate betrayal at its most calculated, I want to sincerely thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this account of what happened to me, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means absolutely everything. And trust me when I say, the vindication that's coming is something you won't want to miss. The comments section is also where I'll be answering questions about the art world and how I ultimately handled this situation. My name is Maren Lansky. Before my world imploded, I was considered one of the top 5 art authentication experts in North America. I built my reputation through an obsessive attention to detail that bordered on the pathological, while others relied increasingly on technical analysis. I maintained that the human eye, properly trained, could detect inconsistencies that machines missed. I grew up surrounded by art. My mother restored paintings for a small museum, and I spent my childhood watching her work, learning how masters constructed their pieces layer by layer. By 16, I could spot a fraudulent signature by the hesitation in the brushwork. By 25, I'd written 2 definitive papers on pigment aging patterns in 17th century Dutch works. Odette joined my team 5 years ago. Ambitious, quick learning, always eager to stand beside me during examinations. I liked her initially. Her enthusiasm reminded me of my younger self. She asked intelligent questions and remembered everything I said. I began bringing her to important authentication sessions, explaining my reasoning as we examined pieces together. What I didn't realize was that she was cataloging my methods without understanding the deeper intuition behind them. She was learning to mimic my conclusions without grasping the underlying principles. Everett hired me 11 years ago to build the acquisitions division from nothing. We succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, growing from handling $10 million in annual auctions to over $200 million. Last year, we secured the exclusive rights to auction the Havenworth collection, valued conservatively at $400 million, largely because of my reputation. I'd spent 6 months traveling to verify each piece, working 18-hour days, skipping weekends, sleeping on planes. The preview exhibition was my crowning achievement, until I collapsed in Gallery 3, right in front of the Botticelli study I'd been concerned about. "Acute exhaustion," the doctor said later. "Your body is shutting down from stress." Tests revealed concerning cardiac irregularities. Not a full heart attack, but a warning shot. I was supposed to rest for 3 weeks. I lasted 7 days before discovering they'd erased me. By day 10, at B's cottage, I had regained enough strength to sit for hours at her kitchen table, making notes and planning. The auction was 4 days away. "What happens if they sell forgeries?" B asked, setting a cup of tea beside me. "Lawsuits, reputation damage, stock collapse," I replied. "The company has survived for 126 years on trust. Once collectors believe we can't authenticate properly, everything falls apart. And that helps you how?" I looked up at my sister. This isn't about revenge. It's about preserving what I built. Is it? She challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're watching a train wreck in slow motion with no intention of stopping it. Her words stung because they contained truth. Part of me wanted to watch them fail without me, to prove my value through their catastrophic error. I tried warning them, I said quietly. I called Everett yesterday and told him there were pieces that needed final verification. He said Odette had already completed all outstanding examinations. And she doesn't know what to look for. She doesn't have the training to spot the inconsistencies in these particular works. So, call the board directly. I shook my head. Everett would claim I'm being vindictive, that I'm trying to undermine Odette because I'm bitter about being replaced. Aren't you? Of course I am. My voice rose despite my intention to stay calm. 11 years building something extraordinary, and they discarded me the moment I showed weakness. B pulled out a chair and sat across from me. Then, what's your actual plan here? I stared at my notes, at the list of questionable pieces and their specific issues, at the names of collectors who would likely bid on them. The auction happens, I said finally. The pieces sell. The truth emerges naturally when new owners have their purchases examined by other experts. The company faces consequences. And then what? And then I decide whether to salvage what's left or watch it burn. The morning of the auction, I felt strangely calm. I watched the live stream from B's cottage, noting which collectors purchased which pieces. The 5 questionable works sold for a combined $78 million. I recognized most of the buyers, serious collectors with their own authentication resources. It took exactly 16 days for the first scandal to erupt. Konrad Riesman, one of the most respected collectors in Europe, was the first to discover the truth. He'd purchased the questionable Van Eyck for $22 million and, as was his custom, had it examined by his personal authentication team before adding it to his collection. His irate call to our auction house sent shockwaves through the industry. This is categorically not authentic, he thundered during the emergency board meeting that was broadcast via conference call to all department heads. I listened in through a former colleague's secret phone connection. The underpainting techniques are wrong. The aging patterns in the varnish are inconsistent. This is a sophisticated modern forgery. Within hours, 2 additional collectors came forward with similar claims. The Botticelli study I'd been concerned about was determined to have a forged signature. The Dürer landscape showed pigments that didn't exist until the 1800s. The company's stock plummeted 43% in a single trading day. Online art publications ran headlines questioning our authentication protocols. Clients began withdrawing consignments for upcoming auctions. 11 years of meticulous reputation building collapsed in hours. The day after the scandal broke, I received a call from Henrik, the board chairman, on my personal number. Marin, we need to speak with you urgently. His voice carried none of its usual confidence. I'm recovering from a health crisis, Henrik. Doctor's orders to avoid stress. This is about the Havenworth authentication issues. We need your expertise. I allowed a long pause. You mean the expertise you decided to replace with Odette's? He cleared his throat. There's been a misunderstanding about your departure. Has there? Because the last time I checked, being unconscious in a hospital bed isn't the same as submitting a resignation letter. Everett may have accelerated the transition inappropriately. The board had no knowledge. Interesting, because I have the press release announcing my retirement, approved by the board. Another uncomfortable pause. We need your help, Marin. The situation is critical. I imagine it is. 5 forgeries sold to your top clients tends to create problems. Can we meet tomorrow morning? I thought of Everett and Odette, likely panicking as their careers imploded. Of my authentication team, now facing scrutiny for failures that weren't their fault. Of 11 years building something only to watch it crumble. The Willowbrook Inn, private dining room, 10 a.m., I said finally. After hanging up, B watched me carefully. Are you sure you're ready for this? No, I admitted. But I've had 16 days to prepare. They've had 16 hours. That night, I called 3 of the affected collectors, people I'd built relationships with over decades. When I explained what had happened, their anger shifted from the company to Everett and Odette specifically. We trusted your authentication, Marin, said Eliza Barden, who had purchased the forged Botticelli. Not the institution's. Yours. Will you come to the meeting tomorrow? I asked each of them. All 3 agreed immediately. I arrived at the Willowbrook Inn 20 minutes early, wearing my most conservative suit, hair pulled back severely, face carefully made up to hide my lingering exhaustion. The private dining room overlooked a small garden where spring flowers were just beginning to bloom. Henrik arrived 5 minutes later, looking haggard, alongside two board members I recognized. The shock on their faces when they saw Eliza Barton, Conrad Reisman, and Wei Ling already seated at the table was precisely what I'd hoped for. "What is this?" Henrik asked, stopping abruptly. "These are the people who purchased forgeries from your auction," I said calmly. I thought they should be part of our conversation. The board members exchanged glances. They had clearly expected to find me desperate and willing to help clean up their mess. Instead, they found me composed and flanked by three of the most influential collectors in the world. "Please, sit," I gestured to the empty chairs. For the next 40 minutes, I explained exactly what had happened, how I'd identified the questionable pieces but hadn't completed final verifications before my collapse, how my notes were mental, not written, as was my standard practice for final authentication, how Odette had claimed expertise she didn't possess. These forgeries would never have reached the auction block under my supervision, I concluded. "The question now is what you plan to do about it." Henrik shifted uncomfortably. "We've initiated refunds for the affected pieces." "That's the bare minimum legal requirement," Conrad interrupted. "What about your authentication protocols going forward?" "We're reviewing our procedures." "With whom?" Wei Ling asked sharply. "The same people who let this happen?" The tension in the room was thick enough to touch. Henrik's phone buzzed repeatedly, but he ignored it, maintaining eye contact with me. "What do you suggest, Marin?" he finally asked. Before I could answer, the door opened. Everett strode in, his usual confidence visibly shaken when he saw the group assembled. "You weren't invited to this meeting," Henrik said coldly. "I'm the director of acquisitions. This falls under my—" "Sit down, Everett," I said quietly. To my mild surprise, he did. His eyes darted between me and the collectors, calculating his position. "Were you aware of Marin's concerns about these pieces?" Eliza asked him directly. "She left no notes indicating—" "That wasn't my question," Eliza cut in. "Did she express concerns about these pieces before her hospitalization?" Everett hesitated too long. "We discussed several pieces that needed additional examination, and yet you allowed the auction to proceed without completing those examinations," Conrad stated. "Odette assured me she had addressed all outstanding concerns," Everett replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. "The same Odette who had never authenticated a major piece independently?" I asked. The room fell silent. Henrik finally broke it. "What will it take to fix this, Marin?" I'd been waiting for this question. "I'll return under 3 conditions. First, I take over as division head, with expanded authority. Second, Everett and Odette remain employed, reporting directly to me. Third, I personally handle all communication with affected clients." "You want to keep them?" Henrik couldn't hide his surprise. "I do." I didn't explain further, but I saw understanding dawn in Eliza's eyes. She'd known me long enough to recognize that this wasn't mercy. Henrik didn't hesitate. "Done. When can you start?" "Tomorrow. I'll need access to all documentation regarding the questioned pieces immediately." As the meeting concluded, Everett approached me. "Marin, I want you to know I never intended." "Save it," I said quietly. "You have a 9 a.m. meeting with me tomorrow. Bring Odette." That night, I couldn't sleep. The adrenaline of confrontation had worn off, leaving me drained but satisfied. B made us tea while I recounted the meeting. "You're going to work with them?" she asked. "After what they did?" "With them, but not for them," I clarified. "There's a difference. It sounds like revenge with extra steps." I smiled slightly. "The best revenge isn't impulsive. It's patient. And what exactly are you planning to do with them?" I stirred my tea thoughtfully. "Give them exactly what they deserve." The next morning, I arrived at the office at 8:30. The security guard did a double take when he saw me. "Miss Lansky, we weren't told you'd be returning." "Surprise," I said mildly, swiping my still active badge. My office, now Odette's office, was unlocked. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the changes. My reference books had been rearranged, my authentication tools reorganized. The silver bracelet sat on the desk beside a half-empty coffee cup. I sat in my chair and waited. At 8:55, Odette walked in, freezing when she saw me. The color drained from her face. "Marin, I didn't. They didn't tell me. That I'd be in my office?" I asked pleasantly. "Interesting." Her eyes flickered to the bracelet on the desk. She instinctively touched her now bare wrist. "That's actually mine," I said, following her gaze. "Family heirloom. Quite sentimental." She blushed deep red. "I'm so sorry. I found it in the drawer and thought that I wouldn't be coming back for it." Understandable assumption. I stood up. The board meeting room is already set up. Everett should be waiting. Walking through the office was surreal. Employees stopped mid-conversation, staring openly as I passed. Some looked embarrassed, others relieved. News traveled fast. In the boardroom, Everett sat alone, reviewing documents. He stood when we entered. "Marin, I've prepared a full summary of the situation and potential remediation steps." "Thoughtful," I said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "But first, let's discuss your new roles." For the next hour, I outlined their responsibilities under the restructuring. Neither would authenticate anything independently. Both would handle direct communication with all affected collectors, personally delivering refunds and apologies. They would attend remedial authentication training under my supervision. "This feels punitive," Everett finally objected. "It's not punishment," I replied calmly. "It's accountability. You both claimed expertise you didn't possess. Now you'll have the opportunity to actually develop it, under very public scrutiny." Odette's eyes filled with tears. "The collectors will never take us seriously again." "That's certainly a possibility," I agreed. "Actions have consequences." As they left, clearly shaken, Henrik entered with the remaining board members. "You didn't fire them," he observed. "No, that would be too quick." I gathered my notes. "They'll each have the chance to prove their value, or confirm their incompetence, every single day, in front of the very people they deceived." Henrik studied me with new understanding. "This isn't just about fixing the authentication issues, is it?" I met his gaze steadily. "I'm solving multiple problems simultaneously. Isn't that why you hired me?" That afternoon, I sent an email to all clients involved with the Havenworth auction, personally signing my name to the authentication failure and outlining our remediation process. The response was immediate: relief that I was back, cautious optimism about restoring trust. What I didn't reveal to anyone was the evidence I'd been gathering during my recovery: the text messages, the premature retirement announcement, the deliberate removal of my authentication protocols, or the much larger issue I'd discovered while reviewing the company's financial records during my first day back. The next 8 weeks unfolded like a slow-burn psychological thriller. Everett and Odette reported directly to me, sitting through grueling meetings with disappointed collectors and enduring remedial authentication training that exposed their limitations daily. I assigned Everett to personally handle the refund for Conrad Riesman's forged Van Eyck, a particularly humiliating task given Conrad's reputation for ruthless questioning. Odette was tasked with creating a comprehensive presentation on the exact authentication failures that had allowed the forgeries to reach auction. She delivered it to the entire international team while I watched from the back row, noting every stumble and incorrect technical term. But beneath these visible consequences, I was working on something far more significant. Late one evening, while reviewing financial records from the past 18 months, I discovered unusual payment patterns, large consultancy fees, to an entity named Aurora Advisors that appeared 3 days after major auctions. The amounts varied but averaged 4% of auction proceeds, substantial sums that seemed excessive for legitimate consulting work. When I tried accessing details about Aurora Advisors, I hit a permission barrier. "You don't have clearance for those records," explained Denise from accounting when I called her. "Only Everett and the CFO can access that vendor's complete profile." "That's interesting," I said, "considering I sign off on all authentication consulting expenses. This isn't categorized under authentication. It's under strategic advisory services." I thanked her and hung up, my suspicions deepening. That night, I called Henrik at home. "I need complete access to all financial records," I said, without preamble. "That's not typically given to division heads," he replied carefully. "I'm not a typical division head, and these aren't typical circumstances." His hesitation was brief but noticeable. "I'll have IT adjust your permissions in the morning." With expanded access, the picture became clearer. Aurora Advisors had received over $14 million in the past 2 years. Their invoices were vague: strategic collection assessment and market positioning guidance. No deliverables were ever attached. I searched business registries for Aurora Advisors and found it had been incorporated in the Cayman Islands 18 months ago. The listed directors included a name I didn't recognize, Vivian Mercier. The next morning, I casually asked Odette about her family during our daily review meeting. "Your mother's name is Vivian, right?" I said between authentication discussions. The slight widening of her eyes told me everything. "Yes. How did you know that?" "I believe we met at the holiday party years ago. Vivian Mercier, correct?" Her face paled slightly. "Yes, that's right." Later that day, I requested a private meeting with Henrik and two board members I trusted. In the small conference room, I laid out what I'd found so far. Aurora Advisors appears to be receiving substantial consulting fees with no clear deliverables, I explained. The company was incorporated 18 months ago in the Cayman Islands, and I have reason to believe it's connected to Odette through her mother. Henrik's expression hardened. "That's a serious allegation." "It's not an allegation yet," I clarified. "It's an observation that warrants investigation." "What exactly are you suggesting?" asked Veronica, the most senior board member. "I'm suggesting we bring in an independent auditor to examine these payments." Quietly, they agreed, though Henrik seemed reluctant. I chose the auditing firm personally, a boutique operation known for discretion and thoroughness. Within 3 weeks, they delivered their preliminary findings. Aurora Advisors was indeed owned by Vivian Mercier, Odette's mother. The company had no employees, no office, and no apparent expertise in art or auctions. The millions flowing into its accounts were largely moved offshore immediately after receipt. But the true revelation came from examining the timing of the payments against our auction records. Every major payment to Aurora coincided precisely with auctions featuring pieces authenticated by Everett personally, pieces that bypassed my team's usual protocols. "He's been selling authentications," I said quietly when the auditor finished his presentation to the small group, "authenticating questionable pieces in exchange for kickbacks." "That's why he wanted you out," Veronica said, her voice tight with anger. "You were the obstacle to his scheme, and Odette was his willing accomplice," I added. "The perfect replacement, someone he could control." "We need to contact authorities immediately," Henrik said, reaching for his phone. "Not yet," I replied, placing my hand over his. "I want to handle this my way." The board reluctantly agreed to let me proceed with my plan, with one condition: resolution, within 30 days. The next morning, I called Everett and Odette into my office separately. With each, I discussed routine matters before casually mentioning Aurora Advisors. "That name has been appearing on our vendor payments," I said to Everett. "Substantial amounts for consulting work I can't quite place." His practiced calm nearly held. "Strategic advisory services, corporate-level initiative." Interesting, because the board has no recollection of approving such an arrangement. A slight tightening around his eyes. Henrik approved it personally. "I see. Well, I'm conducting a routine vendor review. Nothing to worry about." With Odette, I took a different approach. "Your mother has an interesting business background," I said, watching her carefully. She froze momentarily. "My mother? Vivian. She's done quite well with her advisory firm, from what I understand." Odette's gaze dropped to her hands. "I don't know much about her business." "No? That's surprising. Since wire transfers from her company's account have gone directly into yours 6 times in the past year." Her head snapped up. "You can't possibly know that? Financial investigations are thorough, Odette, and bank privacy isn't what it used to be." For the next 2 weeks, I watched them closely. They began having whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. Everett made 3 international calls from his office daily. Odette looked increasingly anxious. Then came the counterattack I'd been expecting. I arrived one morning to find Henrik waiting in my office, his expression grave. "There's been a complaint filed against you," he said, without preamble. "By whom?" "Everett and Odette. They're claiming you've created a hostile work environment, that you're targeting them vindictively because of what happened during your absence." I nodded calmly. "And what does the board think?" "The board is concerned. Your return has stabilized client relationships, but these allegations could create new problems." "I see. Have they provided any evidence of this harassment?" "They claim you've assigned them impossible tasks designed to humiliate them professionally, that you've made veiled threats regarding their futures." I smiled slightly. "Interesting interpretation of accountability. This isn't a joke, Marin. They're threatening legal action." "Let them," I replied. "Discovery works both ways." The next day, I received a formal notice requesting my presence at a special board meeting to address the complaints. The date was set for exactly 1 week later. My 30-day window was closing fast. That evening, I called a contact at the National Financial Crimes Unit. I need some guidance, I said carefully, hypothetically speaking. I don't do hypotheticals, Marin. You know that. Fine. I've uncovered what appears to be a sophisticated fraud scheme involving authenticated art, money laundering through offshore consulting fees. How much money are we talking about? At least 14 million over 2 years. Possibly more. A low whistle. Send me what you have. No promises, but I'll look. 3 days before the special board meeting, I received an unexpected call from Wei Ling, one of the collectors who had purchased a forged piece. I've been approached about an unusual proposition, she said without preamble. What kind of proposition? Everett contacted me privately. He offered to personally replace my forged piece with an authentic work from his private collection, at no cost, if I would speak on his behalf at your upcoming board meeting. My pulse quickened. What did you tell him? That I would consider it. I thought you should know. Has he approached any other collectors with similar offers? Conrad received the same proposal. He was less diplomatic in his refusal. I thanked her and hung up, immediately calling the other affected collectors. 3 had received similar offers. All had been asked to testify that I had known about authentication issues before my collapse, but proceeded anyway due to pressure to meet auction deadlines. They were trying to flip the narrative, to make me the villain of this story. The morning of the board meeting arrived with a sense of foreboding. I dressed carefully, choosing a dark gray suit that projected seriousness without intimidation. As I rode the elevator to the executive floor, I received a text from my contact at the Financial Crimes Unit. Green light. Standing by. The boardroom was arranged like a tribunal. Henrik at the center, Everett and Odette to one side with their legal counsel, empty chairs for me, and my non-existent representation on the other. Before we begin, Henrik said as I took my seat, I want to be clear that this is not a formal hearing. We're simply addressing concerns that have been raised about the current working environment. Of course, I replied pleasantly, though I'm curious why outside counsel is present for an informal discussion. Everett's lawyer leaned forward. My clients have serious concerns about retaliatory behavior and the potential for financial harm to their careers. Interesting perspective, I said, opening my laptop. May I present some information relevant to this discussion? We're here to discuss your behavior, Marin, Everett cut in, not to review company operations. Oh, but the two are inseparable, I replied, connecting my laptop to the room's display system. My behavior has been directly motivated by what I discovered in company operations. The screen illuminated with the first slide, a flowchart showing payments from our auction house to Aurora Advisors, then to various offshore accounts, and finally to personal accounts belonging to Everett, Odette, and Vivian Mercier. What is this? Henrik demanded. This, I said calmly, is why Everett and Odette needed me gone. For the next 30 minutes, I presented the evidence I'd gathered. The suspicious authentication approvals, the precisely timed payments, the offshore money movements, the forged pieces that had somehow received Everett's personal authentication stamp despite clear problems. You've been selling authentications, I concluded, looking directly at Everett. Approving questionable pieces in exchange for kickbacks, laundered through Odette's mother's shell company. The room fell silent. Everett's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. These are baseless accusations, Everett finally said, his voice strained. You've fabricated connections between unrelated business matters. Have I? I clicked to the final slide, a formal investigation notice from the National Financial Crimes Unit dated that morning. The authorities disagree. The doors opened, and 3 federal agents entered, accompanied by Veronica. Everett Klein and Odette Mercier, the lead agent said. We have some questions about Aurora Advisors and certain financial transactions. What followed was precisely the public humiliation they had tried to inflict on me. Everett and Odette were escorted from the building while employees watched from doorways and hallways. Their offices were sealed with evidence tape. Their computers confiscated. In the aftermath, Henrik approached me, his expression a mix of admiration and wariness. You orchestrated this perfectly, he said quietly. No, I corrected him. They orchestrated it themselves. I simply waited for the right moment to expose it. 6 months later, the company had largely recovered. The scandal had been contained to Everett and Odette, who were now facing multiple federal charges. I had been formally appointed as Executive Director of Global Authentication, a new position with oversight of all authentication processes worldwide. On the anniversary of my hospital stay, I received a small package. Inside was my grandmother's silver bracelet and a note from Odette, written from the detention center where she awaited trial. I wanted to return what wasn't mine. It read, "I'm sorry for everything." I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist, feeling its familiar weight. Some might consider my revenge complete, but I knew better. True vindication wasn't in their punishment. It was in rebuilding what they had nearly destroyed, stronger and more resilient than before. The art world is built on trust, on expertise that takes decades to develop and seconds to question. When someone tries to shortcut that process, to fake the knowledge, to claim expertise they haven't earned, the entire foundation cracks. My revenge wasn't ruining their careers. It was preserving the integrity of something that mattered more than any individual success. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want to thank you for listening. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't what we do to others, it's what we rebuild from the ashes of their betrayal. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced betrayal in your professional life? How did you handle it? Please like and subscribe for more stories about navigating the complex, often cutthroat world of high-level corporate dynamics. I'll be sharing more insights from my experiences in the weeks ahead, including what happened during the trial and how we transformed our authentication processes to prevent this from ever happening again.